Name isn't on the lease. That's what Lynette said. Not yelled. Said. The way you say something you've rehearsed enough times that it stops feeling like cruelty and starts feeling like fact. Selah didn't answer. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen. The kitchen she'd cooked in every Sunday for 3 years. The kitchen where she'd learned to make her grandmother's jollof from memory after the funeral. And she looked at the woman her father had married 14 months ago, and she didn't say a word. She didn't scream. That part matters. Because here's what people get wrong about moments like that. They think the silence means weakness. They think when a woman doesn't fight back, she's folding. But Selah Osei had spent 4 years in the army and 2 more doing contract security work in places most people can't find on a map. She knew exactly what she was capable of. She just chose not to use it in her father's kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. She went upstairs. She packed 1 bag. Not because she only had 1 bag's worth of things, she had a whole room full of things, but because she knew, the way you sometimes just know, that if she stayed to pack everything, she would become someone she didn't want to be. She took her father's watch, the one he'd worn every day until the diagnosis made his wrists too thin, a Seiko, nothing fancy, with a crack along the crystal that he'd never bothered to fix because he said a watch that worked didn't need to be pretty. She took that, and she took the folder of discharge papers she kept in the nightstand, and she took the photo from her first deployment, her and 3 other women squinting into desert sun, and she left. Lynette was on the phone when Selah walked back through the living room. She didn't look up. That was 8 years ago. You need to understand something about Selah's father before any of this makes sense. Desmond Osei was a good man in the way that some good men are good. Quietly, inconsistently, in ways that didn't always protect the people who needed protecting. He was generous with his time when he was present, and absent in ways that left marks when he wasn't. He'd raised Selah mostly alone after her mother left, and he'd done it imperfectly but honestly, and she loved him for the parts he got right. When he got sick, she came home. She'd been finishing up a contract in Djibouti, had 6 weeks left on the job, and she walked away from it because her father had stage 3, and the doctor's timeline was the kind of information you don't argue with. She came home and she cooked his meals and drove him to chemo and slept in the small bedroom down the hall. And for 8 months, she reorganized her entire life around his. Lynette Hale came into the picture around month 3. She was a real estate agent. She wore blazers in neutral tones and had the kind of laugh you noticed from across a restaurant. Desmond had met her at a neighborhood association meeting, which was the kind of thing Desmond went to because he genuinely believed in being a good neighbor. He was that kind of man. Selah didn't trust her. Not immediately. Not for reasons she could put into words at the time. It was something in the way Lynette moved through the house the first time she visited. Slowly, the way you do when you're cataloging. She opened a cabinet looking for a glass, and her eyes went to the upper shelf where Desmond kept the good bourbon, and she smiled at nothing. Selah noticed. She didn't say anything. She should have said something. Desmond and Lynette married 7 months after they met, 3 months before he died. Selah stood in the courtroom. It was a courthouse ceremony, nothing formal, which felt wrong, but she kept that to herself. And she watched her father sign his name in a hand that shook slightly at the end, and she smiled because he looked happy. And she believed, right up until she didn't, that happiness was worth protecting, even when you had questions. The will reading was 3 weeks after the funeral. Desmond had updated his estate documents 9 months before he died, 2 months after he met Lynette, 4 months before he married her. Selah's attorney, a woman named Frances who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had the calm of someone who'd seen every kind of human behavior, sat across from her afterward and explained it in plain language. The house went to Lynette. The investment accounts went to Lynette. The life insurance, the policy Desmond had maintained since Selah was 7 years old, the one he'd shown her once and said, "This is for you, this is your foundation," had been changed. Beneficiary, updated, 14 months before his death. Selah was listed in a separate document, a letter of personal property, which entitled her to his watch, his books, and a storage unit in Decatur with some furniture in it. Frances waited for her to react. Selah sat very still. "It is a copy of the updated beneficiary form," Frances said carefully. "The signature is his. The date is verified." "I know," Selah said. "Do you want to?" "I know," she said again. Not angry, just done. She went home, to her father's house, to the house that was no longer her father's house. And she cooked dinner because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. And Lynette came in from showing a property and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, without looking at her, that the house was going on the market in 30 days. "You have a month," she said. "I think that's generous." Selah said nothing. Then Lynette looked up and said, "Your name isn't on the lease," and went to pour herself a glass of wine. She was gone in 18 days. Not because she gave up, because she understood, at a cellular level, the way soldiers understand things, that some positions aren't worth holding, that sometimes you withdraw not because you've lost, but because the ground itself isn't the prize. The prize comes later. The first year was the hardest year she never talked about. She stayed with her army friend Neka for 2 months in Charlotte, sleeping on a pull-out couch and running at 5 a.m. because the running kept her from thinking too much. Nika didn't ask a lot of questions. She made good coffee and left it on the counter and let Selah figure herself out, which was the best gift anyone gave her that year. She got a job doing corporate security for a logistics company in Atlanta. It wasn't glamorous. She wore a blazer and walked perimeters and watched monitors and thought about what she actually wanted, which was something she hadn't let herself do in a long time. When you're a caregiver, when you're a soldier, when you're the person everyone else leans on, you get so good at orienting yourself toward other people's needs that your own desires go quiet. You stop being able to hear them. Selah started hearing hers again somewhere around month 4. She'd been watching the city. Atlanta was growing in a way that was visible if you paid attention. Cranes on the skyline, neighborhoods changing, old buildings being gutted and sold. She'd started reading during her breaks. Books on property investment she found at the public library, because she wasn't ready to spend money on anything yet. She read about acquisition and renovation and rent ratios, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, which was interest, real interest, the kind that wakes up with you. She took a real estate licensing course at night. She passed on the first try. She saved everything she made from the security job. Everything. She was still running at 5 a.m. But now, she was also meeting with a credit union on Tuesday evenings, building a relationship with a loan officer named Terrence, who had been in the Marines, and appreciated that she understood things like discipline and long-term thinking. She told him she wanted to buy property in 3 years. He told her that with her income and savings rate, it could be 2. It was 22 months. Her first property was a duplex in a neighborhood in southwest Atlanta that people kept saying was turning around. She lived in one unit and rented the other, and she treated the whole thing like a second job because it was. She painted the rental unit herself. She fixed the bathroom tile herself. She learned what she needed to learn, and she hired people for what she couldn't do. And she did all of it on a spreadsheet she kept on her phone, meticulous, the way her sergeant had taught her to track equipment. The second property came 18 months later, then a third. By year 6, Selah Osei owned 7 units across 3 properties in Atlanta. She had a property management LLC. She had a business account and a reserve fund and a relationship with 2 contractors she trusted completely. She was 31 years old, and she did not look back very often. But she thought about the house. Not obsessively. Not in a way that ate at her. Just the way you sometimes think about a place you loved. The specific weight of the air, the sound of the floorboards in a particular hallway, the view from one particular window. She thought about the kitchen on Sunday mornings. She thought about her father's chair in the living room, the particular dent in the cushion. She thought about his watch on her wrist, which she wore every day, which still smelled faintly of sandalwood if she let herself believe it did. She didn't know what was happening with the house. And then one Thursday in November, her phone rang. It was Frances, the attorney with the reading glasses. Selah hadn't spoken to her in almost 5 years. "I'm not sure if this is relevant to you," Frances said, But I know you've been in real estate, and I thought you'd want to know. The house, your father's house, it's going into foreclosure." Selah didn't say anything. "The bank filed last month. There's a tax lien too, from what I understand. It'll go to auction in about 60 days. After she hung up, Selah sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. She wasn't happy. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. There was nothing satisfying about hearing that the place her father had spent 30 years paying off was being swallowed by debt. Whatever Lynette had or hadn't done with the money, whatever choices she'd made, the house itself was the thing Desmond had cared about. The house was his. So Selah called Terence at the credit union. She did not tell Lynette she was coming. She didn't tell anyone. The auction was held on a Wednesday morning in a government building downtown. The kind of room with fluorescent lighting and plastic chairs and a clerk who read property addresses from a sheet in a flat, bored voice. There were 6 properties on the list that day. Selah sat in the second row in a gray blazer and waited. When they got to her father's address, she raised her paddle 3 times. Nobody went higher. She drove to the house that afternoon. Just to look, she told herself. She sat outside in her car and looked at the front porch and the oak tree in the yard that had been there since before she was born. And she thought about her father, and she didn't cry because she'd already cried years ago. And now this was something different. This was work. She called her contractor the next morning. The renovation took 4 months. Selah was at the house almost every day. She didn't need to be. She had a good team and they didn't require supervision. But she wanted to be. She walked through each room and made decisions, and sometimes she stood in the doorway and let herself remember things for a moment. And then she moved on. She had the kitchen reconfigured because it made sense structurally, not because she was trying to erase anything. She kept the oak floors in the living room. She had the bathroom on the 2nd floor, the one her father had used in his last year because the stairs were too much by then, redone with grab bars and wider clearance because she was going to rent this property and she wanted it to be right for whoever came next. She had not planned what happened on the last walkthrough. A property manager, a woman named Deb who'd been with her since the 3rd property, called 3 days before the scheduled showing to go over the punch list. During the call, Deb mentioned something she thought was routine. "One applicant for the main unit came through a relocation service," Deb said. "Corporate downsizing situation, from what I understand. Her paperwork's clean, income verification checks out. I'm scheduling her walkthrough for Saturday morning. Name's Lynette Hale." Selah was in her car. She didn't move. "You there?" Deb said. "Yeah," Selah said. "Keep the appointment." She didn't tell Deb anything else. Deb was professional. She didn't need to know. Saturday came in cold and gray, the kind of Atlanta November that doesn't get cold enough to be dramatic, but gets cold enough to be uncomfortable. Selah arrived at the house at 9. The walkthrough was at 10. She didn't plan to be visible. She'd intended to let Deb handle it, to be somewhere in the background, maybe not even inside. But she found herself in the kitchen at 9:45, checking something that didn't need checking. And she heard the front door, and then she heard Deb's voice, and then she heard Lynette. 8 years. The voice was the same. A little more careful now, maybe. The kind of careful you get when you've had to be. Selah waited in the kitchen doorway while Deb walked Lynette through the living room, explaining the updated electrical, the refinished floors, the new windows. Lynette was asking about the utilities. She had a folder under her arm, the kind of folder you put together when you really need this apartment to work out. She looked the same as Selah remembered, except smaller somehow. Not physically, something else. Then they came around the corner into the kitchen and Lynette looked up. The silence was very complete. Selah watched her face go through several things in a short amount of time. Recognition, confusion, something that might have been fear, or might have been shame, or might have been both of those things wearing each other's clothes. "Selah," Lynette said. "Just the name, nothing else." "Miss Hale," Selah said. Deb looked between them, reading the room the way good people read rooms, and said she was going to check on something in the 2nd bedroom and left. A fluorescent light over the sink hummed. "This is your house," Lynette said, "not a question." "It is now," Selah said. Lynette looked at the floors. The same oak floors, the same morning light from the east window. She looked at all of it, like someone trying to understand a math problem she'd already solved wrong once. She started. You don't have to say anything, Selah said. And she meant it. She wasn't being cold. She wasn't being generous either. She was just stating a fact, the way you state facts, when you've had 8 years to decide what kind of person you want to be. The apartment, Lynette said carefully. Is it still available? That depends, Selah said. On your references. Lynette looked up. I run a professional operation, Selah said. Background check, rental history, income verification. Deb has everything you need to submit. If it checks out, it checks out. She paused. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Doesn't. There was another silence. I know I can't, Lynette started, and then she stopped, and she seemed to be deciding something. Your father was proud of you, she said finally. He talked about you all the time. I know that probably doesn't. She stopped again. I know that doesn't fix anything. Selah thought about the watch on her wrist, the cracked crystal, the second hand moving the way it always moved, indifferent to everything. No, she said, it doesn't. She picked up her clipboard from the counter. Deb will finish the walkthrough, she said. It was nice to see you, Ms. Hale. She walked through the living room and out the front door and down the porch steps and across the yard, past the oak tree her father had planted the year she was born, and she got in her car and she drove home. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel hollow either. She felt the way you feel after something long and heavy finally puts itself down. Not lighter exactly, but different, like the weight had redistributed, like she was standing differently now on the same ground. The following Tuesday, she was in the office reviewing applications when Deb set Lynette Hale's file on her desk. Credits, marginal, Deb said. But she's got 2 solid references and the income checks out. Up to you. Selah looked at the file for a moment. She thought about what her father would have done. Not because she owed him an answer. She'd made peace, mostly, with the complicated shape of what she owed him, but because she was curious, because he had been, at his best, a man who believed people could be more than their worst moments. She picked up the pen. She approved the application. Not for Lynette. For herself. For the kind of person she decided, 8 years ago in a kitchen with 1 bag and a cracked watch, to become. Some things you can't take back. Some people never change, but Selah Osei had learned the hard way and then the long way that who you are when you have all the power is the only version of yourself that really matters. She put the file in the approved folder and went back to work. I keep thinking about that bag. 1 bag. That's what Selah walked out with. Not because she didn't have more, she had a whole room full of things, a whole life built inside that house, but because she understood something in that moment that most people take years to learn, that the way you leave a situation says more about who you are than the situation itself ever could. She didn't scream. She didn't break anything. She packed 1 bag and she took her father's watch and she walked out the door. And I think about that choice a lot, because it would have been so easy to blow it all up on the way out, to say every true and terrible thing, to make Lynette feel, in that kitchen, exactly what she deserved to feel. And Selah had the capacity for it. She'd trained for years to handle conflict, and this was conflict, and she chose not to. That's not weakness. I want to be clear about that. What Selah did in that kitchen took more strength than any fight would have. She had the discipline to understand that her energy was worth more than the satisfaction of a moment. That's something I think we get wrong when we talk about strength. We confuse it with loudness. We think strength is visible. But the most powerful thing Selah did that day happened quietly, with a bag on her shoulder and the door closing behind her. And then she got to work. That part is the part that doesn't get talked about enough in stories like this. The years between the leaving and the returning. Selah didn't stumble into success. She ran at 5 in the morning when she didn't want to. She read real estate books at a library table during her lunch break. She sat across from a loan officer and made a case for herself when she had no cushion and no fallback. She built something, deliberately, out of nothing but time and choices. That's what intelligence actually looks like in practice. Not being the smartest person in the room, but being the person who keeps learning when it's inconvenient, who studies the thing nobody told her to study, who figures out what she needs to know and then goes and learns it. And when she finally had all the power, when Lynette was standing in her kitchen, in her father's house, needing something from her, Selah didn't use it the way it had been used against her. She ran the application. She checked the references. She approved it on the merits. That's the part that gets me every time. Not the comeback, the choice she made at the end of it. Because here's what I believe, having sat with this story for a while, what comes around isn't magic. It's math. The things we put into the world, the discipline, the integrity, the years of quiet work, they compound. Lynette took a shortcut through someone else's life, and it collapsed under her. Selah took the long road and it held. That's not luck. That's cause and effect, playing out over 8 years. The question this story keeps asking me is the same one it's probably asking you. Who are you when you have the power? Not when you're surviving, not when you're proving something, but when it's already done, when you've already won. What do you do next? Selah put the file in the approve folder and went back to work. I think about that a lot.